Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Rats in Boilersuits, where we watch Torchwood and tell you about it. My name is Steffan. I am here with Kim. And this week, we are looking at episode 5 of the first series, which is called Small Worlds.
Small worlds. Tiny, tiny worlds.
All right, Kim, I'm going to ask you to tell us what happens in this episode, basically. Give us a synopsis. Before you do that, though, for the benefit of our listeners and viewers, Torchwood is often a dark programme. This episode is particularly dark. Particularly, it involves children and discussion of implied sexual threat to children. So go careful if that doesn't sound like something you want to put yourself through. Maybe this isn't the episode for you. That said, Kim, tell us what this episode is.
Okay. In this episode of Torchwood, we meet an old friend of Jack's, who he apparently knows from a very long time ago, who's very interested in fairies that she thinks are friendly. These fairy creatures seem to be back, and Jack is convinced that they are bad, not good. We also meet a little girl who seems to have been selected by the fairies as a chosen one, and the gang try to catch the fairies in a net, defeat them, whilst havoc occurs with the weather and the child and the friend.
That's a good synopsis. Well done.
Sure.
Yes. So the first thing we see in this episode is we see an old lady seeing some fairies. And she's delighted. But then the minute she turns her back, the fairies turn into horrible CGI monster fairies.
They do.
And that's our pre-credits. That's our setting the scene.
Actually, do you know what we get slightly before that?
No, you're right. There is another thing that happens in the pre-credits.
Yeah. So before that, the first thing we see is Jack, I think, isn't it? And what's he doing, Steph? Because to me, it looks like he's sleeping.
I think he's sleeping.
But that couldn't be him, could it?
He can't. We know he can't sleep. He made a big fuss about it.
Made a right fuss about it. Why would he lie?
Why would he lie? At the very least, he's trying to sleep.
Yeah.
But seems to be disturbed by bad dreams.
Yeah, dreaming. So he's achieved sleep.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. I don't know who to trust anymore.
I don't know who to trust. I think he blatantly sleeps. We actually had a note on that. So the reason we're going on about this, faithful listener or viewer, if you're watching this on YouTube, is because of the line, I think 2 episodes ago, where Jack claims he can't sleep.
Not that he can't sleep. That he doesn't sleep. I feel like that's more important. He's not plagued by insomnia. He's claiming that he does not sleep. He has no need to sleep whatsoever. He is just eternally awake. And Gwen doesn't bat an eyelid. That's what happens.
Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call up. So we had a note from a listener about this. So this is from a listener who goes by the name Shardavan, who says, the does Jack sleep issue is further complicated by Big Finish's season 6, which has Jack briefly succumb to a narcolepsy pandemic, and then stating, I didn't think I'd sleep. I didn't think I could sleep.
So it's this one that's the anomaly then?
So this is the anomaly. Jack... So
he is supposed to not sleep?
He thinks he can't sleep. So what's he doing? Maybe he's trying to enter some sort of meditative state?
What's he up to? Well, later in the episode, they mention magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
Maybe Jack's just taking some shrooms and he's having some hallucinations.
Yes.
Maybe none of this episode is real. Maybe it's all just a hallucination.
It was all a hallucination of Jack's all along. So the relevant thing is that while he seems to be trying to sleep, who can believe what, Jack is having flashbacks to a train, and on that train we see a dead man with rose petals in his mouth.
Jack is having a flashback to a sepia train. So we know it's the past.
We do. We know it is. It makes it look like a Western. It look like because we find out later where this is, and it's not the Old West. It is in fact it's in Pakistan.
Yeah.
But so he has that flashback, and then we see him in the present, in the Torchwood hub. That's where he's at, and he crosses over to his desk, and he's got a rose petal on the desk, which leads me to my first big question of this episode.
Sure.
Why does Jack have a rose petal on his desk?
Well, Steph, right. That is a bit weird, but they can control all of the elements. Fire, earth, air, water. I'm sure they can blow a rose petal into the hub.
Do you think that's it?
You've already started on that's a bit weird. And I'm like, that's not the weirdest thing here. Is it? They can make petals appear in someone's throat and suffocate them.
Yeah.
Or do they physically have to put them there?
No, you might be right. I mean, it wasn't clear to me whether this rose petal mysteriously turned up because a fairy had put it there, or whether Jack just keeps a rose petal on his desk as a reminder of the 15 men who died on his watch.
It's in good condition.
It is in good
keep renewing
it's
it.
Very fresh petal.
Yeah. An alternative explanation is Yanto's knocking about, out of hours. Maybe Yanto put it there.
Yes.
Maybe he's trying to send a little message.
Maybe
he's trying to drive him insane.
Let's talk about Yanto being there, because so last week we saw Yanto sort of fall out with the rest of the gang over a disagreement over whether or not Yanto should have kept his killer robot girlfriend secretly in the hub.
Mm-hmm. And all opinions are valid.
All opinions are valid. But he was very much outvoted by 4 no's versus his. I think it's fine. Stop giving me a hard time.
Yes.
But here we see, okay, Yanto seems to have been forgiven. He's allowed to hang out. But Jack does say to Yanto, you shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
What was your take on this line? Because I think it's unclear what he means.
Yeah, it's weird in 2 ways. It's weird because of the reply as well. Jack goes up. I did like there's a little moment where he puts his hand on Yanto's shoulder. I think that's a nice subtle way of being like, that they're building up some kind of tension between them. Quite nicely.
At the bare minimum, what you can say is that this is a moment that makes us think that Jack is showing that he's forgiven Yanto. Look, I still care about you. Let bygones be bygones. We'll forget about the killer robot girlfriend incident and move on. It's a tender moment. But I do agree with you that actually I read it as something a bit more than that maybe there's the spark of something here.
It's either, hey, don't worry about it. Forget about your sexy robot girlfriend. Or it's, hey, forget about your sexy robot girlfriend.
It's rebound time.
Yeah. So Jack comes up from his bedroom under his office that he accesses via a manhole cover. And he comes out and he says, you shouldn't be here to Yanto. And Yanto says, neither should you. So what do they think he does? Where's he supposed to be? You both work there.
Yeah.
I'm confused by this interaction straight away.
So this is what I think. Maybe I'm overthinking. My take is Jack is the guy who wants his workers to not have their lives consumed by Torchwood stuff. He wants Gwen to have her boyfriend and her flat and her life, and for that not to suffer because of this very intense and difficult and complicated job. So he knows that Yanto right now is kind of on the precipice. He's lost his girlfriend. He's lost one thing that was not Torchwood. Although I say that, I mean, she had been converted into a killer robot by her association with Torchwood. So
that's pretty Torchwood.
But still, there's a sense of don't grieve by throwing yourself into the work, because this is not good work to throw yourself into. This where it's late at night, you should be home. I know you probably don't want to be. You'd rather throw yourself into the work, but please don't. And Yanto goes, well, frankly, back at you, because Jack lives full time in the hub. He is sleeping in the hub. So he is one to talk.
Sure. If I was in Jack's position, personally, I would be like, do you want to go for a drink?
Yeah.
Like, do you remember when your 4 colleagues, do you remember we shot your girlfriend to death? Do you want to maybe go somewhere and talk about that? No?
That's such a good point. The problem they need to solve is very easily solved. Both of them feel lonely and alone and lost.
Yeah.
The solution to loneliness is to find someone you can not be lonely with.
Yeah. Although, have you heard the Big Finish story about how they ended up becoming an item?
No, I haven't.
As a long story short, they're in the car and Jack says, Yanto, pull over. And then he says he's worried about him. And then Yanto randomly kisses him. He's like, whoa, what are you doing? Relationships at work are weird. He's like, who said anything about a relationship? We're both a bit fucked up at the minute. Maybe this is what we need. And then they're supposed to just like, I guess, sleep together for one night and then move on. And then they don't. So what we're describing is kind of actually what happens. It's just, it's not how I'd do it. you know?
Yeah. There's healthier ways through
Also,
it.
as a manager myself,
Yes.
not how I do it.
It's not the way to help your colleague whose partner has been shot by you and your other colleagues.
Yeah. So after we've seen that weird interaction, the next thing we see is an introduction of one of the main characters of the story, which is the little girl. She is, what is her name? Jasmine. Jasmine is her name. She's at school, she's finished, she's waiting at the school gates, and no one is shown to pick her up. We then see her mum and her stepdad, soon to be stepdad. He's called Roy, and he was on the phone. He's forgotten to go and collect her. He's going to collect her late. The mum seems a lot more concerned about this than he does. And poor little Jasmine is just waiting.
Yeah. Roy is an interesting character in the sense that when we first meet him, he seems like a bit of a crap stepdad.
Yeah, but perfectly normal.
Yeah.
Like a perfectly normal man. I have a lot of issues with the way that villains are depicted in this episode, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. So his relationship to this girl is like, one of my favourite things in television is when you see a really, really lovely relationship between a step-parent and a stepchild.
Yeah.
But I think it's lovely in television, but in the real world, it's just normal. Like most step-parents and stepchildren get on. I think it's always a bit of a shame when the tension in a drama comes from a sort of bad relationship between a step-parent and a stepchild. I'm sure it can be done well, but here I just think that's a bit of a shame. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about the other man we meet here.
Yes.
Jasmine, who doesn't have someone to pick her up from school, ends up, I guess she decides to walk home.
Yeah.
And
she tells the teacher Roy is picking her up, but then she's like, fuck this. I ain't waiting around for him. So she just sets off on her own through the woods.
And she is followed by a man in a car who has been sitting outside the primary school skulking about. And now he's seen his target, a girl who doesn't have anyone to pick her up. And he drives to keep pace with her. Mm-hmm. He stops the car to say, hop in. Your mum said I should pick you up.
The classic line.
That
we were all warned about as children.
Yeah. So let's take a moment to talk about this, because we were all warned about this. We were warned there might be dangerous men who might offer you sweets and offer to pick you up, even though you'd never seen them before and you shouldn't go with them. Do we think that actually happens, though?
I don't know. It's a very caricatured kind of predator. But it's like later in the episode, Jasmine is being bullied by two other young girls. And I'm like, have any of these people ever met a child? Particularly if any of these people ever met little girls. That is not how little girls bully each other. They push her down and start kicking her. And I'm sure that's happened to some people.
Yeah.
But like, it's like they came up with the lines on the day. Like, okay, we have a child predator and we have a little girl. Just riff it, guys. Riff it.
Yeah. You're right. There's so little. They are so cartoonish, which I think is a real shame, because I think Torchwood can do predators incredibly well, and it can do sort of disgusting men in a way that feels very coherent with what disgusting men are like in the real world. Mm-hmm. But this guy, I don't know. We know that you're much, if you're a child, you're much more at risk from people than from, sort of dark, sinister strangers in their cars and bags of sweets. It feels very Daily Mail. It feels like what people want you to think paedophiles are like, rather than what they're actually like. Yeah.
I will say, though, the casting of the guy who plays him, he's so good.
Yeah.
I completely empathise with the character all the way through, which is quite a confusing position given his character. But essentially, all they're trying to set up is bad man follow little girl home.
Yeah.
So because she refuses to get in his car, the bad man, he walks towards her and tries to force her into the car, grabbing her arm. She pulls away, and suddenly around the trees is gusts of wind and spooky voices and who is it? And he gets hit against the car, he hits his head or something, and in a panic he drives away, and she's looking pretty fucking smug about the whole thing. She knows exactly what's going on. She's like, these are my buds, go away.
Yeah. She skips away home, very playful. So Jasmine basically has an army of fairies at her disposal. That's what we kind of see here.
Yeah.
I quite like that. There is something I find really appealing about the idea of just a little girl who is completely invincible because she's just got these murderous monsters at her beck and call.
Yeah.
So next, okay. I really like this next scene. Jack and Gwen are going to see specifically a presentation given by Estelle. Estelle is going to talk about fairies. Jack is taking Gwen to see her. And Gwen's like, fairies. She's very skeptical. It's a bit Mulder and Scully, this, I think. And it's so interesting that, like, Gwen has now had her eyes opened to incredible things, but fairies can't.
This is my exact thought, because in the last episode, we were like, it's ridiculous that Gwen suggests a driving rotor and Jack finds the idea laughable. But in this one, I'm like, it works the other way too. Gwen, you've been meeting aliens. You released a sex-crazed monster from a meteorite. You've just met your friend's sexy robot girlfriend. But not in any realm of possibility can you imagine that fairies might not just be myths. Like, it's not that weird, is it? Why is that where her line is?
It's so funny. But also I can sort of believe it as well, because, like, I think there have been times in my life where I've learned a big shocking fact about the government or whatever, where I'm like, oh my, you know, when you hear, sorry, Boris Johnson's brother works for Dyson, and it kind of sets you on this roller coaster of, how is the world that corrupt? How are these decisions being made by a government and just no one cares about it? But if someone was like, yeah, and 9/11 was an inside job, I'd be like, no, shut up. No. I can accept a certain level of corrupt government behaviour, but no, that one is stupid.
Yeah.
So Estelle says, and I'm looking at a transcript here, that she is one of the very few fortunate ones who has been allowed to see the fairies, that it was really difficult. You have to be patient, you have to have faith. And then she shows a photo and we see the fairies around a ring of stones. And Gwen's like, no offence, but this is horseshit.
Yeah, but you know what as well? Gwen is laughing at the back of the theatre. Like, okay, number one, Gwen, you work for a secret underground organisation that catches aliens. Number two, you're here with your friend who has brought you to see a presentation from a friend of theirs. Number three, the friend is elderly. Do you want to maybe just shut your mouth and watch the presentation about the fairies? Have some manners, for God's sake. Poor Estelle.
Yeah, this is Gwen Cooper openly mocking an old woman.
Yeah.
Who is friends with her boss.
She's just trying to tell you about her hobby. She's got a little slideshow. Leave her alone.
I would love to see an old lady claim she'd met fairies.
Me too. These people.
That would be a wonderful day out.
So, Estelle is saying she feels lucky. She shows a photo of some people with some fairies, and it concludes very quickly. I really like that in that scene. We only get about 2 lines to represent it. Like, you don't need any of this, guys. This is just, we're just showing you that a presentation happened. And then at the end of the presentation, Jack goes up to Estelle and chats to her. And Gwen gives a curious look. Ooh, how do these two people know each other? I wonder what the backstory is.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. Because I was thinking maybe she's being a bit too sort of suspicious here. But actually, I suppose Jack is incredibly mysterious. We've never met any of his friends outside work before.
Yeah.
And the first one we do is a sweet old lady who really likes fairies. And, you know, she's not a relative. She's not even described as a family friend. She is his friend.
Yeah. I kind of want to know what the story is between Jack and Gwen. Like, I always assume that none of the other members of the team have met Estelle before this point. And I wonder if, like, Gwen's addition is Jack's decision to kind of open Torchwood to his life a little more. Because what has prompted him to go there, and why is he taking Gwen? He's so secretive. Would he not just nip off on his own for a bit? That seems more up his street.
I think it's clear that what's prompted him to go is being unsettled by the fairy dream and the rose petal on the desk, whether it was planted there or not. Certainly, there's something in the air. He feels that the fairies are back, so he wants to see Estelle. So why bring Gwen? What does she bring to the table?
She's just laughing at her.
Mocking, just open, hurtful cruelty.
Yeah, I don't really understand. Estelle likes these fairies, doesn't know they're evil. Jack knows they're evil. He's seen them kill people. Why has he not passed more of that information on to her to protect her? This is a decision that's going to be more relevant later, but at this point, I just don't get it. But what matters is that Estelle and Jack head back to Estelle's house with Gwen so that he can look at more of the set of photos that she showed in her presentation and continue their conversation, basically.
So we cut away at this point. We pick up everyone's favourite breakout character, the creep from outside the school.
We do, you're dead right.
What's he up to? What's he doing? Well, he's popping to Cardiff Market, and why wouldn't you? Lovely market. Not as nice as Swansea's, but they make do down there. But he's being hounded. He feels like he's being watched. He's clearly very unsettled.
Mm-hmm.
He walks into a Welshman.
Yes, this man is clearly distressed. You don't know anything about him. He looks like he's kind of borderline crying, and he crashes into you. And the stranger is so friendly at first. He's like, "Oh, you're right, mate." He's like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, watch where you bloody going then." It's just such a change.
And
it's
also,
so weird.
It implies that he took him at his word. Oh, he says he's fine, in which case he can look where he's going.
Yeah.
But he is clearly distressed. He's clearly all over the place and bleeding.
True. A key point.
So I think you can use your context clues and go, this man is not okay.
Yeah, it's a weird delivery of both of those lines.
Yeah.
But I always really enjoy it because I'm like, that's a bad day.
I loved him. I love these little, I think Torchwood does them really well. These Cardiff locals that are only there for one or two lines.
Yeah.
So we follow the creep as he goes in. I've just got him. I referred to him as the creep throughout my notes. I don't know if he probably has a name. He goes into Cardiff Market and is this where he's stabbed?
Stabbed?
Is he stabbed?
When is he stabbed?
The note I've written
Did I miss
is
that?
that he's stabbed by something invisible and coughs up rose petals.
Oh, yeah, I don't think he's stabbed. I think he just can't breathe and starts coughing them up, right?
Actually, no, he is. No, we hear a stabbing noise.
Do we?
Yeah.
I just assumed they were shoving them down his throat because we see him do that later.
We do. They do it with their arms, I suppose, which might have blades on, so maybe that's it. It's really gross.
Which might have blades on. You're really obsessed with this stabbing idea.
I'm sure it's
interpreted it as they shove them down his throat. But you're like, no, there's got to be knives somewhere. I heard stabbing.
All right.
You can't pull them all over my eyes.
Let's stick to the facts. What we know is they do shove rose petals down his throat, and then he's got all rose petals. So they're invisible. That's why we don't see it happen. That's why he doesn't see it. But what they're doing is these invisible little creatures are sort of creeping up and like shoving all the rose petals down, which is a funny image once you imagine what that actually looks like. And he freaks out and tries to get himself arrested, basically. He decides he's safe. He needs police protection. I think that's the leap he makes. Mm-hmm. So he decides that he doesn't know what's going on, but he feels that someone is trying to commit a crime against me. Someone is trying to assault me via the medium of rose petals. So I need protecting.
We've all been there.
And if turning myself in for my sex crimes is the way to do that, then so be it.
Mm-hmm. The police officer is another good random Welsh character. She's like, "You crazy bastard!" Just puts him in the car. So our creep is unarrested. We don't know much else about that. We then meet, once again, Jazz, who has now got home with the stepdad, who found her halfway walking home and is like, "What were you doing walking home on your own?" She's like, "I'm fine, no one can hurt me." And she's like, she's not that Welsh, is she?
Yeah.
But it's a very deadpan delivery. She doesn't like Roy. She doesn't really answer the mum. And then does she go outside into the garden or does she go into her room?
Oh, I think she goes into her room at this point.
She loves the garden. It's easy to get confused.
She does love the garden. I'll tell you what's weird about this is in some ways it's a classic parent's anxiety about a child.
Yeah.
Which is that the child, something's up. They've made a new friend. Maybe they've made up some imaginary friends. You're not quite sure what's what, but you know that they are very intensely into their little child's life. Mm-hmm. Their small world, if you will. I think the creep is an incredibly unrealistic paedophile character. Mm-hmm. But the fairies are much more similar to what grooming actually looks like.
That's a good point.
In that they are creating this like very safe environment where she feels, brilliant, like I'm having so much fun, I really love hanging out. But she's also being like indoctrinated and desensitized to violence.
Yeah. The only thing I will say is whatever reason they have for waiting, like if they were just to take the chosen one straight away, they would have just done it. She's on board. You ain't got any convincing to do now. But they're not. There's obviously something stopping them. Maybe they're getting something ready. I don't know. In the meantime, Jazz has to kind of behave normally, and she's rubbish at it. When you're a kid, even if you're like, "Oh yeah, I got all my cool mates, they'll kill you," as we all are. Like, even if you're like that, you know when you're doing something that the adults wouldn't want you to do.
Yeah.
And I just think if she was a bit more coy about it, they never would have boarded up the fence down the back of the garden. Like, she's so weird. She has no sense of when is an appropriate time to shut up about her mates. I'm just like, Jazz, you have a mission here. Keep quiet.
Yeah. This is a bit of a problem for me with this episode, actually, is that it feels a bit like, even though we get these insights into the home, we don't really get to know what's going on in these people's heads very much. We see a lot of stuff happen, but we don't get a very strong idea of how anyone feels about it. So the mother, she's worried about her daughter, but we don't get a sense of the mother talking to anyone else about it. She exchanges a couple of lines with the stepdad about their concerns, but we don't get much depth on that. We don't get how long has this been happening?
Yeah.
Like, what have they tried? I don't know. It's
because how long does this process take? There's some real holes in this one. Like, why don't they just take them as soon as they're friends? I don't understand.
Yeah. We find out that the fairies choose a child to be their chosen one. But, yeah, do they choose that at birth? Do they? Yeah, we have absolutely no sense of the length of the process at all.
Yeah. So, we were saying about how we don't have much of their relationship. We don't know much about what they're thinking, but we do see that Jazz and this stepdad character do not get on at all.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is as the episode progresses, we realise that the stepdad is quite cruel. By the end, he is physically abusive towards Jasmine. We don't know if that's the first time or if that's indicative of a pattern of abuse like this. Probably it is the first time, isn't it? Because if it had happened before, the fairies would have punished him.
I think it wouldn't be out of the question if Roy has always been horrible to her, because that would have made sense as to why she's withdrawn. And I wonder if maybe the fairy characters pick children who are already isolated as part of their grooming process. She was like being isolated at home by this new boyfriend or stepdad or whatever. She's being isolated at school because she's bullied, and they're like, I know exactly the one to go for. That would kind of be in keeping with what you'd expect the grooming process to go like from the fairies, right?
That makes sense, actually. So I suppose we see Jazz as a child, a vulnerable child caught between two different abusive parties. A stepfather who is very straightforwardly abusive. He is just a mean, cruel man who eventually gets physical. And on the other hand, these highly manipulative creatures who are trying to take her away from the safety of her family and go, no, you belong with us. And, she gets drawn into a world of violence, but she herself is protected and immune from it. Violence is something that happens to other people, to her enemies.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Estelle's house. We've got Gwen and Jack looking through the things. I suppose they're looking for fairy things. But Gwen finds a photo. The photo is an old photo of Jack.
And we know that because it's sepia, like his dream.
Yes. That's how you could tell that it's old. So it's a really old photo of Jack looking the same age he does now. Gwen shows this to Jack and goes, is this you? He says, sorry, no, that's my dad.
Sure, Jen.
So this continues the line that we've seen for a while with Gwen, where she is really interested in looking into his past. And she also already kind of knows that there's something weird about how old he is, or that he keeps popping up in periods of history.
Yeah, well, I don't understand why they don't work this out quicker, personally. This is another thing that really bothers me. Gwen found out one of the most unbelievable points about Jack the first time she probably met him. What she found out is that he can't die. He doesn't know why. Something happened to him a long time ago, and now he can't die. The first place my head would be going is, I bet he's lived a while then. I bet he's done loads of stuff, man. Oh, he's probably hundreds of years old. Wonder where he's been. Wonder if he fought in the war. I wonder how that works. I wonder if he ages. I'd be going through all this stuff. The second I see, I know that Gwen, she does work it out. She sees the photo. She knows he's lying. But I always find the way that they present the information to us a little bit weird. It's later revealed, obviously, that is in fact Jack. And the way that they revealed that is like Gwen emotionally going up to him and being like, it wasn't your dad, was it? It was you. Like, it's a big reveal. I'm like, we know, Gwen. Catch up. Please.
Yeah. So my reading of it was that she was like, basically she clocked it straight away.
Yeah.
And she approaches him to say, it wasn't your dad, was it? It was you. And I know, and you know. Come on. In this moment, you can admit it.
So for the purposes of this, Jack says it's his dad. Gwen presses for more information about that because she's curious about his past, but he refuses to talk about it and deflects quite quickly.
Gwen then goes into the garden, right?
Yeah, Jack deflects that. So Gwen sort of sneaks off to go and ask Estelle about it and to try for answers from someone.
Gwen basically questions Estelle like a police officer. Not confrontationally, not with hostility, but the questions she asks are very police officer questions. She is trying to establish a timeline.
Yeah.
and whereabouts. So she asks Estelle, have you ever seen Jack and his father in the same place? That's basically what she's asking.
Yeah, because she says the line that we're like, well, have you ever seen them both in the same room? Did you, Jack, and his dad ever meet up together?
Yeah.
Well, she's going for the Hannah Montana, and Estelle does not read it at all.
Yeah. In fact, Gwen's first question is, did you know Jack's father after the war? She says no. I do have big questions here. I have to ask, how does Jack, what does this relationship look like? We do get more details as the episode progresses, but here's what we know. Jack meets Estelle when she's 17.
Yeah.
Which I've got to say, seems a bit young.
It does. This is something that always flags up in my head as a bit odd. 17 is one of those ages that, even 10, 20 years ago was just acceptable to talk about as if they were adults. I interpret that as the first time I saw her, she was 17 and she was beautiful. I loved her at first sight. But it wasn't until years later that the relationship started. I don't know. Because it's it's a very small point to get hung up on. And I don't think it's really necessary to kind of pick apart when it's obviously just one line. But it sits a little bit weirdly with me. So
yeah, I choose to interpret it that way. It's not how it's presented though. It's definitely presented as being this again, like it's a very strange dated thing. There's so many. I think that in the 40s it was so normalized for significantly older men to have very young partners. I mean that's still not uncommon today.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing with Jack is he was probably rough in his 30s or 40s. Even when he died the first time.
Yeah.
He's now living forever without aging. So it's hard to kind of explain how old is he really? Is he actually an old man? He doesn't behave like an old man. So it's a sci-fi thing.
It's like the vampires thing, right? It's like,
Yeah, he is like a vampire.
They can date 20-year-olds fine. But he's 17, it's just a bit much. And I guess he was in the war. That's what soldiers were doing. And it's not real life. So my brain is like, no, shut it down.
Yeah.
In the last episode stuff, you talked about Yanto shoving Lisa when he got frustrated. And we picked it apart for a little while. Like, I just don't think I would do that even if I was at my most angry. And I was like, oh yeah, I had that note. But I just assumed that was a direction issue. We're like, there's so many things. In order to get through Torchwood, especially in the beginning, they were like, oh yeah, no, that's not true. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
It's not even a thing.
There's just so many moments that you go, that didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. She was 17. No, he meant she was 27. He made a mistake. It's fine.
So he met her. He had some sort of relationship with her. Clearly an incredibly meaningful one because we later learn that they promised to be with each other until they died, which is lovely and also a bit short-sighted of Jack.
I know.
Because he must have known at that point that he was unable to die.
Yeah.
Unless Jack meant up until my next death. And then out.
Yeah, he's kept his promise multiple times.
So what we know they met in the past. We know they were together and that relationship was very serious and that Jack honestly intended to be with her forever. Clearly that changed. In fact, that changed after the war because he never came back to see her after the war. So my guess is that he's decided that he can't be with her. That's not going to happen. He's going to remain young forever.
I mean, I imagine it's not so much about her aging. It's more to protect her because to tell her who he is, he would have to tell her about a lot of stuff. And anyone who finds out about Torchwood type stuff is always in danger.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's true.
I'd hate for her to die related to any kind of monsters connected to Torchwood.
Well, that's the problem if you get your partners involved.
Yeah.
And then it seems as though Jack waits long enough that he's able to re-enter her life once she's older and claim that he's the son of the original Jack Harkness. So that must have happened probably the early 80s at the very earliest.
Yeah. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. She's got photos of him. He's right there. Look at his face. But fine.
Yeah.
It's literally him.
Some people look like their dads. Yeah, because that's the other thing, is he must be so careful to hold back information. We know that he refuses to talk about his dad, which is clever, but there's so much other stuff he must choose not to say. I just think like I've been with my wife a good long time. I think if I vanished for 40 years, didn't age, and then re-entered her life and pretended to be my own son, I think she'd see through me. Not because of biographical details, but just because, I mean, you are clearly Steph, just very obviously.
And she says, she's like, he's so like his dad. same walk, same smile. I'm like, Estelle, that is the same man. Open your eyes. Open your mind just a little bit.
Maybe that's what he decides. She's gullible enough to believe fairies are nice. She'll probably swallow any old story.
Sorry, no, yeah, that's a good point though. She's gullible enough. Not gullible, but like her mind is open enough to believe in the supernatural. But it literally doesn't occur to her that maybe Jack hasn't aged. Like, it's not even been that long. This is insanity.
She only believes in like fairy tale stuff. She doesn't believe in sci-fi, so she can't detect time travel or immortality.
At the very least, like, the first logical place your mind might go is he was cryogenically frozen.
Yeah.
Like, he's been frozen and come back, right? Ignore all the time travel. But that's, I forgot she believed in fairies because I was like, she's just a normal woman. He's trying to protect her. No, she hunts fairies.
Yes, she is. She is Estelle, fairy hunter.
Yeah. So we never really find out anything other than that, but it's pretty obvious, and Gwen knows too.
So next we see Jack and Gwen walking away from Estelle's home, and they have a conversation about fairies. What happens here is Gwen asks Jack, what are fairies? What are they actually then? You're saying there's something a bit more sci-fi to them. What are they? And Jack says, they're something from the dawn of time. How can you possibly put a name on something like that? Because, of course, old things cannot be named. Like, there are some things
like
that are so
sun.
ancient. Like the sun. We don't have a word for it, do we? or the ocean.
Yeah.
Or space.
I bet Welsh would have a word for that.
Welsh does
Welsh does old things very well.
It does. My wife Eleanor does not like this episode on the basis that if there is a Welsh TV show that does fairies, she reckons they should do Welsh fairy mythology.
Yeah, that's fair.
And Welsh fairies are not nice. It's only like Victorian fairies that anyone thought of as nice. Mm-hmm. Some Welsh fairies might be useful, but they weren't these lovely, delicate things.
Yeah. Well, nothing in Celtic folklore is really nice, is it? It's all horrible.
It's all chaos and horrible. Yeah. And Eleanor did not rewatch this with me, so she hasn't seen this since November 2006 when it first aired.
She's like, I'm not having it.
Yeah.
Wrong kind of fairies.
To this day, her attitude is, if Torchwood want to catch some fairies in Wales, put out some bread and cheese. That's how you do it.
So yeah, Jack tries to explain that these things are too old to name, but he does give us some clues about what he knows. They're kind of present in the corner of your eye. You can't really look at them. They're always around, but it's kind of invisible. Lots of key features that make them very difficult to see, and also that they play tricks with the weather. Yeah. So we later understand that they can pretty much control all the elements, essentially. Dream team, best powers. But right now, Jack says they can control the weather, they can control the air, they can take the air from your lungs, they can do whatever they want. Spooky. Gwen and Jack then head back to the base to discuss with the team what they've seen. And they bring up the same photo that Estelle showed at her little presentation. Is this a famous photo that was doctored?
Yeah. So these are the Cottingley fairies.
Okay.
The Cottingley fairies basically are a very famous forgery. So basically these two little girls, I think one was 9 and one was 16, don't quote me, were playing in the garden and decided to mess about taking photos. They wanted photos with some fairies. So they did that. They took a photo. The question is, did they fake it? That's the mystery. And Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame was writing an article, like he was very spiritual. He believed maybe there were fairies. He got really excited about this photo and used it in an article so that it was brought to wider attention. So kind of everyone in the 1920s were familiar with the Cottingley fairies. And the way people talk about it now is as if everyone thought, oh, clearly fairies are real, this photo is evidence. But actually, most people, I think, just went, they just faked it. I don't know how, but they faked it.
It's very impressive fake. They're children.
It's really impressive. It looks really cool. And years later, one of them came clean and admitted that it was faked and explained how they did it.
Cool.
And it's incredibly simple. They had a book that had like a picture book of fairies, and they just neatly cut the fairies out and propped them up. And yeah, it's just it's sort of an optical illusion, I suppose, that those would not have looked convincing at all at the time. They look otherworldly. They don't look like they belong in the photo. They look like they glow slightly, but they're fairies, so that's fine.
Yeah. That's what they do.
Yeah. And yeah, again, the children never admitted to faking it until right at the very end. But also I think it helps to popularise the Victorian idea of fairies, which is that they're just these lovely, delicate, beautiful things that play with children. And I guess that's part of what this episode is doing, is it wants to go, no, fairies are much more primal than that traditionally, and they have control of the elements and they're terrifying.
Yeah. So the Torchwood team are looking at this photo while discussing it, right? And Gwen offers up a lot of information about it. The others laugh. And she's like, well, I did a project on it when I was she at school or uni or...
At school, yeah. She wrote an essay in school. This is another thing that annoys me in television is when people have to have a really stupid excuse for knowing things.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Like everything I've just said about the Cottingley fairies is stuff that I knew. I double-checked a couple of facts to get it right.
Yeah.
But I knew that. I've known that. That's just because it's a well-known story. Not everyone knows it, but some people just know it. How do I know it? No idea. I probably listened to Radio 4 at some point. But as soon as someone in telly goes, PC Gwen Cooper, how do you know about these fairies? She has to justify herself.
Yeah. Although saying that, around the time when Gwen is talking about how she did that project, that's how she knows the fairy story, they mention the woods that they were taken in or something, or the woods that the weather pattern is weird in. And Owen goes, oh, I know it. It's got an odd history. And they're like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, it's always stayed wild. Even the Romans stayed clear of it. And he offers up his own fact. Like, it's not that weird to know things.
Yeah.
So, as the team is discussing the fairies, Jack gives them the heads up once again that what they can expect to look for is unusual weather patterns.
Yeah.
Nobody believes him.
Mm.
This annoys me all throughout the episode. Jack is like, hey guys, all this stuff's a little bit weird. They play tricks with the weather, so keep an eye out. And Tosh is like, all right.
Yeah.
She's like, I mean, I guess I'll set a thing up for unusual weather patterns. What's he on about? They're so weird about it. Like, they just don't believe him.
And weird weather is like, there can be a science fictional explanation for that.
Exactly. Like, there are many normal things that can play tricks with the weather, and that's the one where they're like, all right, a drive-in rotor. So
the creep turns himself in. That's what happens next.
He does. He's now back at the police station, and he says, look, you've got to help me. They're trying to kill me. They didn't want to hurt that little girl. I don't know why. And then he admits that he's been in trouble before, and it is implied that he has been arrested for, I assume, child grooming or trying to hurt a child in some way before. And we get quite a good line of that, don't we? They build up his character enough with that line, and I'm like, okay, into the cell you go.
Yeah.
And then what he says is, and if it's God, oh my God, I'm so sorry. So he thinks that because of all this weird stuff happening, it must be God punishing him for trying to abduct children, I suppose. So the police lock up our cartoon paedophile in a cell for the night. I assume they just think he's on drugs or he's drunk and he'll calm down after, or he's having an episode like a psychosis or something.
Well, in fact, we find out that is exactly what the male police officer thinks, because he says that later on to Torchwood.
I mean, if I thought someone was having a psychotic break, I wouldn't lock them alone in a cell to be scared, but that's the police for you. So he's alone in the cell. They hear screaming. They go to open the door and they find him dead, which is very weird because no one's come in or out. Ooh, what's going on? Torchwood get the report and they head there. Again, the team do not understand this. All of the things they've seen so far, they're like, yeah, that's fine. But a man dying alone in a cell, can't work it out. They're like, this is impossible. No, it's sci-fi. So Tosh kneels down by him. Don't understand why it wasn't Owen, but sure. Tosh kneels down by him and is like, looks like he died from asphyxiation, is it? Like basically he's suffocated. Yeah. But there's no marks around his neck or face or whatever, so it wasn't a person who suffocated him. How confusing. At which point Gwen bends down and finds in his mouth, what is it, Steph?
Rose petals.
It's our old friend, the rose petals.
This is genuinely creepy, and I really like the rose petals.
Yeah, I really like it.
In fact, because we skipped over the part where, as he's dying, he starts coughing up these rose petals. I think we see that in the market as well. That and it's disgusting. Like, it's covered in spit, and it's really physically gross. Yeah,
it's particularly those bits where he's like spit flying everywhere. Like, he commits, and it really, really sells how sinister it is for me.
Yeah.
This time when you see it, it's such a disgusting, pitiful way to die.
Yeah.
Is what you see. It's horrible. Jack sees the petal removed from his mouth and is giving the knowing look of a man who's seen too much. Yeah. He's like, I remember my sepia days. The rose petals look a bit redder this time. But
So we also get Jack, Gwen and Owen investigating the stone circles. We didn't talk about that scene. Jack reiterates here that we're not talking about something knowable and normal here. We're actually talking about something primal and bizarre. And the line written for Gwen is, I know you told me it's that corner of the eye stuff. And Eve Miles plays it like she's annoyed, which I love.
Yeah.
That she's noticed that Jack is just like, he's been off on one lately about these fairies, these evil from the dawn of time. How do you give them a name? There's this uncontrollable element. And at this point, she's going, yeah, just shut up. I get it. I get that there's some creepy, it's corner of the eye stuff. Just say what you were going to say.
Yeah.
I think it's worth talking about the fact that Jack is clearly properly unsettled and freaked out by these. And it's interesting because when you see your lead character, your normally unflappable lead character, suddenly out on a limb, it's like when the Doctor meets the Daleks and he's like, oh, this isn't just a normal week. This is a bad episode.
It is now, but...
So it is interesting seeing that Jack's relationship to these fairies is like, we know later that he lost 15 men to the fairies, and he's not okay with it. He's not okay with how unknowable it all is, that you can't just look up what planet they're from. They are something much weirder and much less controllable than that.
Yeah. So an unsettled Jack and the rest of the team return to the hub to discuss their findings, at which point the phone rings. It's Estelle. She has called to let Jack know that he was in fact right. Fairies are not all good, and she thinks there's some in her house, or at least nearby. She can hear the whispers, she can see things out the corner of her eye, and she senses, I mean, I think it's shown pretty obviously, like, it's not just what she's seeing, you can see that she's sensing an emotional presence of something threatening.
Yeah.
Probably because she was too close to them, right? I know it's not explicitly said, but I assume the fairies just don't like being investigated.
I was going to ask you that question. It's so unclear to me why they kill Estelle. It's so strange.
Is it? It could be that they're because she's friends with Jack.
Yeah.
So she's just a casual fairy friend, and they've tolerated her.
Yeah.
But Jack is investigating, and she's close to him. Is it a warning to Jack?
Do you know what? It's exactly that. I've got this line written down from the conference room that what Jack says is that fairies kill for two reasons: as a punishment or as a warning to others.
That'll be it then.
So there we go.
That makes sense.
Creepers died as a punishment. Estelle dies as a warning. To Jack, I guess, to say, back off. They are busy trying to get Jasmine. Don't intervene. Don't try and save her. We are taking this little girl.
Yeah. So Estelle is threatened. She calls Jack. She says they're not all good guys. And he says, don't worry, we're on our way. During this discussion is the point when we get the most ridiculous line. And the line itself isn't that bad. It's fine in the script, but it's just so like, it feels a bit performative because he's like, oh yeah, these creatures, they're so weird and threatening. Sometimes I think they're part Mara. And they're like, Mara? What does that mean? He's like, oh, it's where the word nightmare came from. It's like the most like, they're just giving you the building blocks for it. And the line itself is fine. Again, it's sci-fi. I quite like taking stuff that's already true. Yeah. And, oh, what if there was a species called this? This is connected to this. It's etymology. Love a bit of etymology. But no, his just delivery doesn't sell it for me. It just feels quite awkward. Yeah.
To me, it feels like a line the writer wanted in there because the writer was like, the Mara were on my mind when I wrote this. And I want to nod to that so that people make the connection. And I just think, I don't think the episode benefited from an allusion to Mara.
It's trying to do that thing too much. We've just been told that these characters are outside of logic, right? So they're giving us that version of it, that kind of more spiritual side. But then at the same time, they're telling us, oh, there's another side of sort of more science to it that can be backed up with a bit more logic and words. Like they didn't have a name, but also they have this name that's the root word of, I think it just confuses both of those versions of these creatures.
Yeah, and Mara's a really good example of doing that, I think, because I think what the line is doing is it's referencing the Mara, like the demons, like the real world concept of Mara, which I think is like a Chinese demon.
Sure.
But also the Mara are a Doctor Who monster from the Peter Davison years, from multiple stories, and obviously they are drawing on the real world Mara in doing so. But when I hear that line, my mind makes the Doctor Who connection of going, oh, is this, are you kind of, are you connecting this to an existing Doctor Who concept?
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a problem because, if my brain makes a fan connection and that connection is not intended, that's fine, I've just watched too much Doctor Who, I'm happy to admit it. But it has to do the other thing really well in that case. You know, it needs to benefit from drawing in this other thing.
Yeah, because I like taking a myth that we all know and to like, well, I feel like the Pied Piper would have worked better for this.
Yeah.
You know, you could have made some kind of like, oh, you know, the Pied Piper is a story. It was actually the manifestation of these kind of things. Like, it doesn't quite land for me. I find the line funny, if anything.
Yes. And actually, do you know what? We haven't nominated any Torchwood moments this week.
Yeah.
But I think there is something a bit like... No, this probably is more of a Jack moment than a Torchwood moment. It feels like a very Jack thing for him to go... He's sort of thinking out loud, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bit of the Mara in them. Like, I think he's been quite smug. It's like he's lived with this idea for such a long time that he's like, oh, you wouldn't understand. Whereas actually, what he's saying is very understandable. It's very easy. Gwen and Tosh are not lost, actually, Jack. They absolutely, as long as you phrase yourself clearly. The only reason they're not clear on what you're talking about is because you're not being very articulate.
Yeah. Although you say that they are clear on what he's saying. In the next bit is another example where they're on their way to try and help Estelle. And Tosh is like, it's so weird. The weather forecast is sunny spells, but there's this really small bit where there's bad weather. And it's like, how many times have you been told? She cannot comprehend it. So as much as I'm angry at Jack for being smug and trying to act all mysterious and aloof, these people are idiots.
Yes.
They are rushing to save Estelle from these threatening, weird fairy creatures. Jack has told them they control the elements and they control the weather. They're driving there, and Tosh is like, that is so weird. There is a small spot on this map that is the only location affected by bad weather today. Like, do you think that might be Estelle's house, Tosh? Do you think that might be where she lives? The weird weather pattern is where Estelle lives. She knows that something threatening is happening. She's a bit of an idiot here. Her little cat, she's like, oh no, my little cat's outside. Is my cat going to be all right? And I'm like, right, cats are creepy. Cats and fairies are definitely friends, okay? She steps outside to try and draw the cat closer, and the fairies, the wind, slams the door shut. So Estelle is now locked outside of her house. Moses doesn't care. He's vibing. He's off running around in the garden, and she is trapped in this really aggressive, windy, cold rainstorm.
So what ends up happening is that the rain is so heavy that Estelle ends up drowning in the rain. And by the time Torchwood arrive, it's too late. She has passed. Yeah.
It's a tough scene to watch, actually, I think. Because it's an elderly person, watching an elderly person go through quite an aggressive, painful death. I really don't like that scene. I also wonder, the rain, I hope it was warm water.
Yeah.
I hope they were looking after her.
That. Like, I didn't like seeing a fictional lovely old lady get murdered by fairies, but also I didn't like a real old lady
having to act getting murdered by fairies in the rain.
Yes.
It's
I wanted to have a nice time.
Yeah, I wanted to have a nice time. So yeah, unfortunately, Torchwood arrive not in the nick of time at all. Just a little bit too late. So they've murdered Estelle as a warning to Jack. And yeah, it's really sad. Just drive faster, right?
Yeah.
Just drive faster. Although they would have killed her no matter what. Like these, I don't think breaking the speed limit is a match for these weird supernatural creatures.
And we get Jack's genuine grief. He has lost someone that he genuinely loved.
Yeah.
And apparently had some sort of ongoing friendship with as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a very sad scene.
Jack kneels down, holds her, and this is the point at which Gwen is like, it wasn't your dad that was in love with her all those years ago, was it? It was you. Like, yes, thank you, Gwen. I don't think now is the time to have a gotcha moment with Jack, you know? Yeah. I know it's not said like that. She's saying it very empathetically, but yeah. Ha! I knew it!
You're trying way too much for her to have been your dad's girlfriend. It was you. 1-0 Cooper.
Yeah.
So we get a conversation here, right? Jack does actually open up and tell Gwen. He tells her the truth.
And the first thing he probably says is, I need a drink or something, right?
Yeah.
So they go back to the hub and he's having a whiskey. This is when we find out that Estelle was 17 when they met.
I didn't notice what he was drinking. Was he having a whiskey?
It looked like a whiskey, I think, yeah.
If Jack is drinking whiskey, that's interesting to me because I might be wrong about this, but I've really got it in my head that Jack doesn't drink. I've got a memory of him having water when he's in the pub with Gwen in the first episode. And I don't know where this idea comes from, because I've tried looking it up in a transcript and I can't find it off the top of my head. So I don't know if I've made that up or if I've assumed that. But I think even if I'm right, I accept that he's just lost someone who meant an awful lot to him. He can make an exception now.
Yeah.
You know, that just shows the depth of his grief, I suppose.
So we get 17. We get the troop train now. That's what the discussion is, right?
I'm looking at a transcript, and its stage direction is Sepia Memories of Lahore, 1909.
Excellent. Sepia memories. I bet Jack has a lot of sepia memories at this point.
I think he has a lot. He has so many sepia memories.
So many sepia memories. Is that what happens as you get older? Do you think you get to about age 50 and your memories are all in sepia?
Yeah, have you tried remembering the early 2000s recently? They're not sepia, but they look like TV shows look like in the 70s when you go outside.
They look like a faded VHS tape, because that's around the era that we get, It's like, it's going to be people in the future looking back and be like, ever since I turned 50, all my memories are like Blu-ray.
Like, it used to be 4K, but as I get older. So what Jack says is that he was in charge of 15 men. It says it's a troop train, so it doesn't say if this was at wartime.
But Gwen asks him, she says, is this during the war? And he goes, no, before that. So it's like a normal army event before the war.
Yeah, just a straightforward Commonwealth Garden army event.
Bog standard army event.
Not one of the special championships that we had twice in the 20th century. What we find out is that a few of those men, they were all up to tomfoolery. A couple of them got a bit excited and ran over a child.
We've all been there.
That's
all I'm saying in this episode.
And it turns out that the child they accidentally killed was a chosen one. And so they are all punished by the fairies. The fairies kill all 15 men in the troop. They don't kill Jack. Maybe they can sense that they can't.
Yeah, that was the wonder I had. But I was like, well, they're supernatural. They're probably like, it's not going to work. Don't bother.
Next scene, we find Gwen and Rhys later on coming back to the flat to find that it's been trashed by fairies and it's covered in rose petals. Brilliant Rhys line in this scene.
It was excellent. I wrote it in capital letters. I was very excited. Gwen and Rhys walk into their flat, and he's like, and she was annoyed at me for stealing a special stapler or something like that. Is that exactly what the line is?
Yeah. It's a bit more specific, in fact. He says that she wouldn't say a word for 3 hours because she thought he'd stolen her special stapler.
We never know if he actually did.
I absolutely think he did.
I think he did too.
But I think he thinks he's in the clear because he didn't realise it was her special stapler.
No, you're dead right.
The way he phrased it, she thought I'd stolen her special stapler. I didn't. I just saw a stapler there. I can do some stapling, can't I?
The only note I have on that scene is Gwen's flat trashed, special stapler. That's it. So, it's not really super significant. It's just the fear, right? You see how scared Gwen is. She's realizing that these creatures can do literally whatever they like. Around the same time, we also see a scene of Jasmine's mum at home, hearing noises outside. I think she's taken the bins out or something. And she hears those kind of supernatural noises, corner of the eye thing as well, and senses some kind of dark omen, I suppose. So what they're showing us is that these creatures are always lurking, always watching, and they're ready to fuck some shit up right now.
You're not safe anywhere. You can be locked in a jail, you can be in your own home, it doesn't matter, they will get you. What I think is interesting to the character of Gwen here, Gwen is so obsessed with compartmentalization. Yeah. She does not talk about work with Rhys. Okay, she's not really allowed to, but it goes beyond that, and she does not like that the fairies have come to her home. And my feeling is that's not just because it's dangerous, obviously that's terrifying, but also that this can't happen because now what am I going to say to Rhys? Like, he can't be allowed in on this part of my life. Yeah. Those things need to be kept secret. Rhys just assumes that it's a normal break-in. His line, I think, is, they smashed everything up, the bastards.
Yeah. But also, it's a bit weird that we see them seeing that their flat has been trashed. Then we see Jack coming to help clean up and like continue the investigation. But where's Reese at that point? He's gone. How did you convince him to go? Your flat's just been trashed. Your first port of call is to call the police. So somehow Gwen has had to be like, no, don't call the police. I'll call my work. They're special ops. That's higher. How did she get rid of him?
Yeah.
Like, because if my partner worked for some like special ops thing and was high up in the police, I'd be like, oh, amazing. You guys can probably get this pushed a little bit higher, get a prosecution, we'll track him down. And then if they're just like, no, can you leave? Unless they're like, oh, this is all secret. But I don't think.
I think even long term, even after all of this episode is over, Reese is going to be like, that time my flat got trashed is a big deal for most people.
Yeah. Did we ever find out the answer for that? No, sorry, sweetheart.
Yeah. Sorry, it's classified.
Maybe they retconned him.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Because retconning Reese, it feels like a big deal. It feels like a betrayal. It feels like you are choosing to make your own partner forget.
Yeah.
For that to happen off screen is a little bit strange.
That's true, yeah. I think it would have made more sense to not have him in that scene, wouldn't it? It probably would have made more sense just to have Gwen go home. Jack comes and they have to quickly tidy the flat before Reese gets home. He's actually really not necessary to this episode at all. Like, I love him. And like, for the person who only has one line, it's the funniest line in the whole thing.
It's the best line. It's the highlight of the episode.
Very strange, yeah.
But yeah, on a rightly level, he shouldn't be here.
Yeah. After Gwen's flat scene, we see Roy taking Jasmine to school.
Yeah.
Where she waves at the trees because, again, she has no subtlety whatsoever. I know she's a child, but come on now. And he's like, who are you waving to? Oh, just my friends. And he's like, he's not friends. Like, if you're a grown man and that's your insult to this tiny child. Yeah. Come on now.
He's also got the line here about, like, no wonder your dad left when you were a baby.
Oh, sorry, yeah. No wonder your dad left when you were a baby. He must have seen what was coming. Like, Roy has flipped now. I don't know where that came from, but I just found it really unrealistic. Just weird cartoony caricature of an evil stepdad.
I completely agree. Torchwood can be very good at showing us lots of different sides of the same character.
Yeah.
This is not an example of that. We are seeing the same sides to this stepdad basically every... No, we see two sides to him. We see him as like a bit of a jerk and a massive jerk.
Or he's evil.
Yeah.
At which point, having seen that interaction, then we go to the school and we're seeing that clearly Jasmine is isolated in pretty much every aspect of her life.
Yeah.
Jazz is being bullied at school by two girls who are bullying her in the most unrealistic way I've ever seen. They walk up to her, they push her over, and then later they're like, did you tell on us? I think you deserve a good kick in. They throw her on the floor and just start laying into her. When has that ever happened? When have these like 8-year-old girls, when have you ever seen like, how old is Jazz? Maybe like 10?
Yeah.
When have you ever seen 10-year-old girls throw another one onto the floor and kick them? Again, I'm sure it's happened, but I don't think that's an accurate depiction of your average bullying situation in a primary school.
So, the bullies are basically tormented by wind. So it's the same trick we saw tormenting the creep earlier in the episode. But we find out later, they are not killed, which is unusual. Everyone else who has wronged Jasmine was murdered by the fairies. These two girls are not. What do you think of that?
I just assume it's because they're children, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if they're not the chosen ones, they're still children, and there's something sacred about a child's life, clearly.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's a kinship between the fairies and young girls.
Yeah.
So I think that is why they escape with their lives. But they don't escape unscathed. They are, first of all, traumatized and tormented. Yeah.
Yeah. So Torchwood spot this unusual weather pattern of the weird storm at the primary school on their equipment, and they're like, that'll be the fairies, so they shoot off to go and find them.
I quite like this. I could have done with more of this. My favourite stuff in this episode, I think, is Torchwood turning up at a place to investigate what's happened and asking questions. And it's also really funny to see that massive SUV with the words Torchwood carved into it. Turning up at a tiny little Welsh primary school.
So... a very traumatized teacher is like, the storm didn't even touch her. I don't understand. She was just stood there smiling at it all. And she is, when the storm is happening and those girls are getting stuck in the wind, she is creepy. Don't like children singing songs in the background. It's a classic horror film.
Always creepy.
Yeah, always awful. So now that they know Jasmine is the chosen one, they go to her house where Roy and her mum are having a little barbecue.
I've got a theory about the barbecue. So what happens in this barbecue is Roy is tormented and killed. by the fairies eventually. My theory is that originally he was burnt alive. I bet that's what was in the script. Because we are told that the fairies are elemental and we've seen wind and we've seen water. But we are told that they can also use fire and this is a barbecue. It's just a theory I've got. I'm basing that on nothing. But it feels neat to me to finish the Trinity.
That's a good point.
But
that's not what happened.
Too horrifying or too expensive.
Maybe.
But what we get instead is a very grown-up barbecue.
Yeah.
Like Jazz is so being left out of the group here.
Yeah, it's very weird. Jazz and her mum have a brief discussion in the kitchen about her friends that she mentioned to Roy earlier. The mum, I know she's correct in being suspicious, but the way she deals with it is just really, really weird. She's so confrontational with Jazz. Jazz is like, oh, they could be anywhere. They could even be in this room. And she's like, when? Now. Don't be silly, Jazz. Like, I don't know if she's just scared, so she's being a bit defensive, but it's like, if you want a child to talk about all the weird stuff that's happening, let him keep talking. Maybe she needs a therapist. Maybe she's lonely and she's got imaginary friends. Any of these things could be true. Just let her talk and find out.
The strange thing is that Jasmine has never kept these creatures secret.
Yeah.
She's very open about the fact that she's got these imaginary friends.
Except in the earlier scene where she's doing shadow puppets with them and then they fade away. But
they hide.
Yeah. But
it's them hiding. She is not hiding them necessarily.
Yeah. Feel the room then, Jasmine.
Yeah.
Read the room. And clearly they don't want you to tell everyone about them.
Yeah.
Pretty very obvious to me.
The other thing to talk about here is that the bad stepdad has built a fence.
Yes.
That will keep Jasmine away from the special part of the garden where she has to go to commune properly with the fairies.
Yeah, which is a rubbish plan.
Yeah.
Because one, the fairies can do anything, but sure, he doesn't yet know that. He doesn't even know that they exist. But two, she's small. She can't climb over the fence, but she can get there another way.
Yeah.
This is not like this impenetrable fortress of doom. It's a fence. You've put something in the way.
But it's quite significant, isn't it? I mean, my assumption is that it kind of that fence spans the back garden. It's enough.
But why is she even worried? Because she has these magical friends.
Yeah, that's true.
They'll break the fence down for you. You know that they will. It's the principle of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, it's someone standing in the way of her relationship with the fairies. Everything we see in this episode implies that you can't ever stop the fairies. However, I think there must be a way to stop the fairies, because otherwise why would they need to warn Jack off? Why kill Estelle to warn him to stay away?
Yeah, that's true.
Clearly there is something within the realms of possibility that he could do to stop them. Mm-hmm. So maybe Jasmine doesn't know what can keep them out and what can and can't keep them out. And maybe a fence can. She doesn't know. She's a kid.
Like how the sonic screwdriver doesn't work on wood.
Yes. Maybe fairies can't work on wood.
Fairies never work on wood.
Lol, they can. And they're going to kill her stepdad.
Then she's like, well, this isn't fair. I'm going to go play with my fairy friends in the garden. And that's when she sees the fence has been built by him and he's really smug about it. Then they have an altercation. It's pretty intense, where she gets angry and he tries to stop her and pull her back. She bites him and then he just slaps her across the face and calls her a bitch. Like, we just full mask off. I hate this child. Again, she completely got into such a caricature of an evil child-hating man. It's so weird.
It's so intense. It's very hard to find depth and nuance to this character. He's just a knob.
Just a knob.
So next, the stepdad returns to the party. Mm-hmm. It feels like he's checked out. He's done with this girl.
So he's just hit her and he's just tried to go back because he knows that she's powerless. But little does he know.
So he then does an announcement, right?
Oh, yeah, of course.
He brings Jasmine's mother to his side. Mm-hmm. What is the speech?
The speech is, she has been my rock, my best friend, blah, 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 and now we're looking forward to having children of our own.
Yeah.
Is that just supposed to make Jazz feel more isolated? Is that his purpose with that?
It's such a weird announcement, because they're not saying she's pregnant. No.
Is it a birthday barbecue? Is it an anniversary barbecue?
Maybe.
If it's an anniversary, that might make sense, but it's very weird. It looks like it's set up like either they should be announcing a pregnancy or he should be proposing, but neither of those things happen.
Yeah.
So Jazz comes out and sees the speech being made, and the weather starts to change because the fairies are like, mate, don't hit our number one girl. I'm not going to let you get away with that. And the little horrible creatures come. We saw them at the beginning, we got a glimpse, but this is the first time we've properly seen them just walking around vibing, right?
Yeah.
They go to Roy, they jump on him. Around this time, Torchwood arrive because they've come from the school, and they run into this mad scene to try and help. One of them jumps onto Jack. Gwen very stupidly pushes it off of Jack, thinking that it'll kill him. I'm like, listen, he can't die. Pay attention, Gwen.
I suppose it's possible she thinks that he can be killed by fairies, but even that's tenuous because he's met fairies and he wasn't killed by them.
Oh yeah, true. He's literally survived them already. I think he's fine.
Yeah. So the fairies kill Roy, and it's again very gross, very graphic. And here we do see their horrible little arms go down his actual throat.
It's absolutely vile, isn't it? It's horrible.
That arm goes so far into that man's
Where's he going?
body. Yeah. The shape of the arm is extremely strange as well.
Yeah, it's disgusting. Another thing the fairies do is they burst a hole in the fence so that Jazz can get back into the forest. So that didn't last very long. 1, Roy is dead. 2, your fence is destroyed already.
Your last act on this earth has been destroyed. Jasmine starts walking to the bottom of the garden, and it becomes clear that this is the end game. The fairies are here to take her forever and to make her one of them.
Yeah.
And so Torchwood run after her, but then Jack decides to just let it happen. Puts out his arms, stops anyone else from intervening, and allows her to be taken away.
Yeah. What are your feelings on that bit?
I really viscerally hated it.
Yeah?
But it makes an upsetting amount of sense, I suppose. It depends on how it's presented. I think my problem with it is it feels like the episode is telling us, you just got to let it go. You know, do you know what? If fairies come for your child, you've just got to let your fairies take the child, because the alternative is they'll stop at nothing.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not a relatable lesson to my life. Whereas what this episode has been is it's been kind of a commentary on parenting and on being a good citizen and on what an adult should be doing in light of a child going through something difficult. We've had lots of different theories so far. Maybe we should listen to the child. Maybe we should talk to the child. Maybe we should make sure they're okay. Maybe we shouldn't try and abduct them. Maybe we shouldn't slap them.
Yeah.
Like, nothing earth-shattering, but it's a fairly straightforward, treat your kids nicely moral. And then right at the end, Jack just lets them be abducted, and I just think there is no context in the real world where it is acceptable to just go, well, do you know what?
Yeah.
There's just no metaphor for it anymore. This story only works if we think it's about fairies, and there is no relatability to it.
But it is about fairies, Steph.
It is about fairies.
It's about fairies.
It's just about fairies. I don't think you should tell a story where, at the end of the day, sometimes you've just got to let a child be abducted.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, Jasmine wants to go. Now, don't get me wrong. She's a child. I don't think she knows what she's fully consenting to. But I think it would have been more understandable if her mum had died.
Yeah.
If she had lost her caregivers, I think it would be more of a justifiable decision. But it's a bit weird because her mum's crying, begging them to let her go and get her daughter. And Jack's like, nah.
I think it does work as a character point for Jack, because Jack is terrified of these fairies. He was traumatized by them. He lost a squadron of men to them, and he genuinely believes they are undefeatable.
Yeah, I always think it's a bit unfair after she's been whisked away with the fairies, and the next shot we see is all of Torchwood walking to the car, not speaking to him.
Well, my issue isn't with Jack, actually. My issue is with this as a story.
Okay.
It's that, like, when I get to the end of a story, I want there to be a sense of, what did this mean? I don't mind an unhappy ending. In fact, some of my favourite episodes of Torchwood have incredibly upsetting endings. But this one, I just think, it's just a bunch of stuff, isn't it? You know, like, it doesn't feel like it.
But also, it's like what they're trying to say is that some things are undefeatable, right?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I think I could have done with that being articulated, I suppose. I could have done with that speech being delivered, that sometimes you try, because at least then that's what it's about.
Personally, every time we saw Jack, from the moment he saw the guy in the prison cell who'd been killed, every time we see this happen, he's got this kind of like glazed over, pained expression.
Yeah.
And you could argue that he'd made the decision way earlier in the episode. Do you think it would have been a more rewarding episode for you if the story was about Jack having to make that decision, keep it from the others, and then do it at the end? And that had been more clearly shown in his thought processes across the episode.
Yes. Yeah, I'd have much preferred that. Because without that, we spend a huge amount of time investing in the story of this child and her caregivers.
Yeah.
So it just seems really dissonant at the end to be like, ultimately that wasn't the story. This wasn't a story about how to look after a child.
Yeah.
Something I'm starting to realise actually is my favourite episodes of Torchwood are very characterful. Like that's what they do. They're kind of character pieces.
Yeah.
Like, my favourite of the ones we've watched so far is The Ghost Machine, because I like just even little things like, meeting the various characters, not all of whom tie into the plot.
Yeah.
They're just sort of people we meet along the way. What Owen goes through a big character arc in that. We really zoom in on the characters. Here, this feels more like, this is the investigation this week.
Yeah.
And we get to find out facts. We get to find out that Jack had this girlfriend, but we get the facts of that. We don't get much personality. We don't get to see...
That's true, yeah.
...how they were together. There's little bits of that.
Yeah, the only emotional talk we get is Jack telling Gwen about Estelle, and it's not... Yeah, you're right. It's like a character... It's a plot written that relies on character-driven lines and episodes and doesn't have them.
And the dilemma is weird as well, because the moral dilemma Jack is presented with is, do I just let these fairies take this child and continue to take children for the rest of time? Or do I try and stop them? Well, that's not a great dilemma for Torchwood.
No.
Like, you should just try and stop them. There's just... But I think there's a way of presenting it differently and to go... Like, what if the fairies had said, well, do you know what? If we choose this one, maybe we're done.
Yeah.
Let us have Jasmine and we don't abduct anyone else. That's a different type of dilemma and would have worked better for me, I think.
What we didn't do at any point in this episode, Steph, is choose any nominations for the Torchwood Moment of the Week. Do you have any to consider now? I would like to nominate initially an overarching failure for anyone in Torchwood to understand that the weather is connected to the creatures.
Yeah, that is a good point. And then mine is the final moment where you've got a team of 5 people, 4 of whom want to save the child.
Yeah.
And Jack outvotes them. He says, no, I'm your boss. I'm making the call. We're just going to stop now.
Yeah.
And so and they're all in a mood with him, and they all storm into the car in a just
like
moody and grumpy.
Teenagers.
And he's like, what was I supposed to do? And it's very clear that all 4 of them are like, try and save the child.
Yep. My nomination pales in comparison to what was the key point of that episode. I completely agree. I think that is our Torchwood Moment of the Week.
All right, well, that's it. That's it for Small Worlds.
Cool.
Next week, we are
week,
watching Countryside.
Countryside with a C.
With a C.
It's with a C. There's a joke in there, guys. It's with a C.
It's quite... I do like that joke. That joke is the best thing about that episode.
Countryside is one of my favourite episodes of this series.
Is it?
It is, yeah.
In that case, I don't mind admitting to you that it is my least favourite episode of Torchwood.
That's so interesting.
So that's going to be fun. Okay.
Yeah. Why? I mean, we'll have a lot of time to discuss that one. But yeah, tune into that in a fortnight's time. Thank you very much, Steph, for talking about the greatest show in the world with me.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for joining me. Yes, you specifically.
Thank you so much. You and all the listeners at home. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening, guys. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at BoilersuitRats. If you're listening to this, we also record our episodes and put them on YouTube. I was going to say youtube.com/BoilersuitRats, but that wouldn't be true in any sense. If you search Rats in Boiler Suits on YouTube, you'll find us. Or you can get the link on our Twitter and Instagram. My name is Kim. This has been Kim and Steph.
My name is Steph. It has been Kim and Steph.
Cool. Thanks very much, guys. Goodbye.
Goodbye.